Thank you for joining us this week, and welcome to
Bourbon. Yes, and welcome in. Here we are, finally, Bottle Bond. I'm Chance.
I'm Adam. How you doing, everybody?
Hey, so we're here because we like to drink whiskey. We're good friends, and that's what we're going to do together.
Yep.
I have been drinking whiskey for just, I don't know, like 10 years. I don't know. Not as long as some people, but longer than some others.
Yep. Quite a lot longer than me.
It's true.
I actually didn't really develop the habit until COVID times.
Yep.
What else are you going to do?
Yep. It's a great time to start drinking when you're alone in your house by yourself.
Yep.
That's a good time.
Yep.
But yeah.
Close the blinds. Pretend it's dark outside no matter what time of day it is. Yeah.
It feels dark outside during COVID anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So me and Adam became great friends, and then he realized that I knew a lot about whiskey and had a bunch of questions. Isn't that about right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Sweet.
And I like to learn a lot. I want to know about things.
Sure.
And the thing that kind of struck me, right, is you've got this notion of, everybody talks about how alcohol's been a part of everything forever at all times, right?
Yeah.
Alcohol's what built the pyramids, and alcohol's what did this, and whatever.
Yeah, like we invented agriculture, and then immediately they invented beer.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're like, all of these things have all this like ancient history, but being that bourbon is a U.S. thing, I figured there has to be some amount of like finite history, right? So like clearly the country's only a couple 100 years old at this point. Everything's written down from the day the country started, so that clearly means
that we should be able to find that info.
Bourbon's written down, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, no, none of it. Nobody knows anything about it.
Likely because they were drinking the bourbon instead of writing about it.
That's that, and it was illegal as well. But yes, as we will be doing shortly, drinking does not go. I mean, Ernest Hemingway would disagree. Drinking went great with his writing, but maybe not with historical writing.
Yeah.
But yeah, and
his
then
books were also always usually pretty short.
That's
for a pretty good reason.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you want to know? Yeah, like where should we start?
All right, so bourbon, fundamentally, bourbon means something, right?
Yeah.
So there's like bourbon, there's straight bourbon, there's cask strength bourbon.
There is.
Right. So I know, like just the other day, actually, somebody taught me that technically bourbon has no aging requirements. Straight bourbon does.
Correct.
Fundamentally, right?
Sure.
So it's aged in a charred oak barrel.
Yeah.
Is like the number one thing all bourbon shares.
It has to be. It has to be aged in a charred oak barrel. It has to be made in America. It doesn't have to be made in Kentucky or in Bourbon County or anything like that. That's all nonsense.
Even though people want that to be the truth.
Of course. Just like everybody's going to root for the home team.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it just has to be made in America.
It's not required to be made in Kentucky.
Correct.
But like by the numbers, it does happen to tend to be there. But it's it's the real sort of unifying trait.
Exactly.
Charred oak barrels that have never been used, or virgin charred oak barrels, right?
Exactly, and the only geolocation that's required is
in the U.S.
In the U.S.
Yeah. And like so, the charred oak thing that is uniquely bourbon.
Correct.
Right, and aging. I think you told me this, right? Like so, aging was already a thing, right? That was already things that was like a trait immigrants brought in when they came here in the first place.
Yeah.
Because they're like, this is what makes the good stuff.
Exactly.
Definitely going to do this.
Exactly.
And then somehow, like, it led to charred oak becoming like a staple of what makes it bourbon.
Exactly. Okay, so let's all right, so like we were just talking about, bourbon, there's a lot of like mystery around its beginnings, right? But there are a lot of like folk tales about whiskey, right? Like some of them like you would have read in high school, like the style of folk was like old Rip Van Winkle fell asleep and like slept for 100 years or whatever. Like similar things. So one of those about charred oak barrels is going to be about Elijah Craig. Elijah Craig in 1789 was a Baptist reverend, and he is largely attributed with being the first person in America to take bourbon and age it in a charred oak barrel.
Okay.
Now, like I said, this is a folk tale. Like whether or not that really happened and it was really Elijah Craig, probably not. I mean, like you said, people have been aging stuff in barrels, and they've been burning those barrels for a long time overseas. And most of the American whiskey history, if you follow it far enough back, is attributed to the Scot and Irish settlers and immigrants who came over and then settled and started distilling here in the States.
I guarantee there's like some legend, some lore that goes with like Elijah Craig specifically. So that sounds like this is going to be like a homework thing for me. I'm going to like want to read some of those actual stories and how the heck.
Oh yeah.
This reverend went from like sacramental wine to like much stronger stuff.
It's interesting, right? Like, there's a bunch of these figures, and some of them you'll recognize, right? Like George T. Stagg is a famous distiller, and like so, there's bottles of George T. Stagg, Elijah Craig. We're about to drink some. So like, whiskey has a way of immortalizing the people who do major things, and like it's really common, these folk tales. Like even Elijah and Craig, there's a story that like right across the county line, there was another guy doing some first things in whiskey as well. And so I think that guy was supposed to be doing the first sour mash, which I think is attributed to James Crowe, if I remember.
Yeah, that sounds right. I think so, something like that. So like the one of the things that I always like kind of stands out to me is like how somebody's always got a story that comes up that's like super cool about a thing. Like the one of the other stories I want to like touch on someday is that Mr. Sam stuff that we had that somebody gave us, right? Where it's like, this is the guy who like planted all of the oak groves for Buffalo Trace, or it's like crazy, weird, fun.
Yeah.
Like, but I appreciate the idea that like you're paying homage to the people who do the work.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how you kind of get to that point.
And that's honestly, dude, that's how I nerd out about whiskey. Like, don't get me wrong, I like drinking it, I like tasting it, I like talking about it, I like all that sort of stuff. But where I really nerd out is when we start talking about the history of whiskey, and when we start getting into like where it came from and the distillery and what like all the things that it's been. That's where I really have a good time.
So,
all right,
we've talked a little bit about Elijah Craig. You want to see what kind of magic you made?
Yeah, we got to drink this.
All right.
So, do you know how to taste this?
Well,
I'm sure you do.
Mouth hole, yeah. With my face,
with your mouth hole.
Yeah, it's basically that is the extent of my expertise at this point.
No worries.
I have horrible allergies and all this other stuff, so my sense of smell kind of sucks.
No worries. Why don't we go over how to taste whiskey?
I've learned to taste. I've done things where you taste wine before, and I know it's like based on some of the same principles, sort of, right?
Yeah, there definitely are. I mean, there's a few things that don't, like, you don't look for legs in whiskey, that sort of stuff, but there are definitely like some aspects.
Okay.
So, yeah, so there's a lot of ways to taste whiskey. Everybody has like their own things. I'm going to walk you through what I do.
Okay.
So first thing we're going to do, take your glass. I like to swirl just a little bit. And there's three parts of tasting whiskey. There is the nose, the palate, and the finish. Okay. And those are the three separate moments in a tasting that you're going to get different things from the whiskey.
Okay.
So the nose is what it smells like. Mm-hmm. Nose is really easy. You just smell the whiskey. Mm-hmm. Now, I would recommend, especially for our listeners, if you are smelling the whiskey and you're coming in for your nose, don't just like bury your schnoz. You don't want to blow out your nose so you can't smell anything. You really want to make sure that you kind of approach it lightly, get the scent so that you can get in there. Now, you don't have to be like, I mean, there are guys like that. There's definitely guys like that.
Well, there's the like pressing your nose to one side or whatever, and I know that's got some sort of thing about activating certain parts of your senses or whatever.
So you can definitely press your nose one side or the other. And so, for instance, if you just smell out of one side and then you swap to the other side, it's a way to reset your nose and smell it all over again. Because we naturally adapt as we smell things to hide them. And so the longer you smell whiskey, the less you will smell it. So by closing off one of your nostrils, you can still smell from that side just by swapping.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And then palate is?
In your mouth. Once you are actually drinking and it is in your mouth physically. That is the palate. There's a lot of different ways that people talk about this. Some people swish it around. Others put it under their tongue. Others like just take it straight down. We'll go through that in a second. And then there's the finish. The finish is after you swallow, there's almost like an eruption of flavor that comes back from your throat.
Okay.
And it just all of a sudden, your mouth tastes different.
Okay.
And those are the three parts of tasting whiskey that you will hear people talk about.
Okay.
So let's do a nose. Super easy. Just smell your whiskey. So this is Elijah Craig. Couple notable elements. It is 94 proof. 94 proof means it is 47% alcohol by volume. Mm-hmm. It's labeled as the father of bourbon, first to char oak barrels, just like we talked about. Yeah.
And it's a small batch, meaning some number of barrels are involved, right?
Correct.
Unknown number, but some number.
Yeah, so small batch, so we talked earlier about how every word means something. Mm-hmm. Small batch is fantastic because it legally means nothing. It is literally there to imply that this is a limited quantity of this kind of whiskey without having any legal requirement. Like if it says single barrel, there are actual distilling requirements and bottling requirements for that bottle. But small batch doesn't have those requirements. It just sounds like it probably does.
Right. And so it's like, should imply something to the effect of less than all of the barrels they had for a year.
Exactly.
But it could be literally anything else.
Exactly. I mean, like, if you ever look at like the number of bottles of Elijah Craig's small batch that come out, you look at it and you're just like, how could anyone call that small?
Right. Because you can walk into any store in the country and find like 300 of these bottles.
Exactly.
Which means clearly that's not that small of a batch.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that kind of bit me too, because there's some other like fancy like brands that are going for the gimmick of small batch this or rare release that or whatever. And you look into it and you're like, oh well, yeah, their small run is 125,000 bottles or something like that.
Yeah.
You're like, okay.
Cool.
Right. So
what's a big run?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
All right, cool.
But so that's what that means.
Okay.
So what do you smell when you smell this?
Other than the actual alcohol.
Oh yeah. I mean, you'll definitely smell that. It smells like
something
alcohol.
a little spicy. I can't really put my finger on it.
Okay.
Not like peppery spice, but like just sort of like holiday spices or something like that.
Yeah, it doesn't smell like jalapenos, but you could see like holiday
Something
spices
sweet,
are a really good
like
way
a
to
sweet
put it.
smell for sure, right? And that's part of what the char does, right? That's part of what
Yep.
makes bourbon different is tends to be a sweeter.
Yep. So
because the caramelly from the char.
exactly, charring the oak barrel gives a flavor profile that leans towards caramel, vanilla, and like some butterscotch, brown sugar, that sort of kind of like flavor profile. A lot of bourbon for people who have drank it more than just like a shot at the bar, right? When you get in and you start really tasting whiskey, you start getting those kinds of notes through. And yeah, I mean, Elijah Craig's not exactly, it doesn't have a killer, like strong, overpowering nose. But yeah, I definitely get a little bit of vanilla in there, and you get some of that sweetness for sure. Almost
I
like
can see almost like a vanilla extract, right? Where it's got kind of the alcohol-y smell, but also kind of the sweet smell to it.
Exactly.
But what's funny is the best way to tell what I'm smelling is probably to see what it tastes like.
Oh, are you saying you want to drink the
I'm just
whiskey?
saying we should try for the palate part.
All right, we should do the palate. Now, I know you're ready to go, but I got to give you one more piece of advice. Okay, so some people who I respect greatly recommend taking a small sip and drinking it straight down. Don't keep it in your mouth. Just take a small sip, drink it straight down.
Yep.
I don't do that. Okay. I pour whiskey under my tongue, let it sit there for a second, and then push my tongue into it so that it flows over all sides of my tongue at the same time.
Okay.
That's how I drink whiskey. You may be different. Maybe you drink it in and you just hold it like right in the center of your tongue. You bubble it a little bit so that it burns a little bit less. Maybe you swish it like mouthwash. Like everybody has their own thing, and that's what I want to get to here. Is the goal is to taste it.
Yeah.
The first thing that's going to happen for new drinkers is it's going to burn.
Right.
Ignore the burn.
Yeah.
Wait. Just hold it in your mouth. It's not going to hurt. It shouldn't hurt you. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. It shouldn't have hurt you. Just hold it in your mouth until the burning subsides. And after the burning, that's when you find the flavor.
Right. So actually, like, little bit of history for me, right? Like, I never used to like brown liquor at all. And somebody tried to teach me that's like the best way to taste scotch, right? Is you hold it in your mouth long enough, the burning goes away. Because that's when your saliva and everything starts to actually break it down and the flavors completely change.
Yeah.
And I did try it, and I did agree, but at the time I also thought they were a moron. It tasted awful to me at the time.
Sure.
Right? And then slowly getting into this stuff and finding the right thing for me, I realized it's not just about how you taste it, it's also about finding the things you like the taste of.
Exactly. And that's really like, and it's like that with beer, it's like that with whiskey, anything that you develop a taste for. Yeah. It's because the taste is so complex that you have to get to the point that you can identify the individual parts of it. And that's what whiskey is.
Let's try it.
To you.
To you. To us. To Bond.
To the bottle bond.
So I do see what you mean about the finish.
Yeah.
Like, I definitely feel like there's the point where it subsides down the back of your throat, and then it's not quite gone yet, right?
Yeah, and it's like you get a whole like suddenly just a burst of new flavor.
Yep.
And it's a really weird thing once you get there and like you start tasting whiskey like that because you're like when I taste this, it's on my palate and I'm like, ooh, a little creme brulee, maybe a little bit of like a sweet vanilla like we were talking about, nice, and it's got a nice thick texture to it.
Yep.
And then I swallow it. And it pops right back up, and it comes forward in the finish for me as floral. It's like honeysuckle and dandelion stems
Almost
in
like
the floral.
it's almost like something that's like a recipe that's made with cinnamon.
Yeah.
It doesn't taste like cinnamon, but it tastes like something that's like supported by cinnamon.
Exactly. Or like a cinnamon off, like someone was baking, but there was someone allergic to cinnamon, so they used a cinnamon ish thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, cool.
But yeah, it's good. It's such a great. It's
a simple bottle, right? It's cheap. It's easy to find. It's got some history.
Yep.
And it's enjoyable.
And like you're saying, total accessible. Like this is maybe a $30 bottle.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, depending on where you get it. And even Elijah Craig as a brand isn't really complicated. There's only a couple of different bottles. You're not really going to go wrong with any of them. This is the base of their flagships. So like, and it's delicious. Like I keep a bottle of this at my house and I have over 100 bottles in my collection.
Yeah.
And I still drink this all the time. So
Nice.
It's good stuff.
Very cool.
Yeah. I'm going to cheers you again and I'm going to
Cheers.
drink some more whiskey. So sometimes on your second taste, you'll get a slightly different flavor. Like that time, I still got the creme brulee, still got the floral finish, but I got a slight amount of plum on the palate as well.
I barely eat fruits, so that's hard for me to tell, but I believe you on that.
Oh,
You know what, though? I did also note that sometimes I get this on different bourbons and it kind of comes and goes.
sure.
There's sort of like an oil-ish consistency.
Yeah.
And that's always been kind of a weird one for me. So, like, I wasn't sure if that's, like, the tannins from the oak or if it's
Can
something
be.
else.
Yeah, so we'll talk about tannins and a lot of that in a future episode. But yes, it's not uncommon for different whiskeys to have different textures. And oily is definitely a texture that people will experience.
Okay.
And part of that is from the distillation and bottling process. Sometimes it'll feel really thin. Like I don't like a thin feeling whiskey. Even if it tastes good, like I like my whiskey to have a little bit of viscosity to it.
Okay. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
I dig it.
I dig it. Ugh. I gotta say, for the first episode of Bottle Bond, I think this is pretty great.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start.
I agree. To you,
To us.
to the listeners,
Uh-oh.
and to the show,
To next drink.
to the next drink.